Hello. It's been a very interesting day, so thank you very much for inviting me to be part of this conversation. I've been involved in open source community mapping for many years, and this is an area, especially in developing countries, that's been getting a lot of attention lately. So I'm very glad for that, but I must admit to you all, I'm a skeptical person. So this talk is a bit of a challenging talk. I want to look at the range of ideas and perceptions about community mapping and really start to help shape a conversation about how we can best practice open source community mapping in order to be the greatest benefit to humanity. In 2009, Ground Truth worked with young people in the Kibera slum of Nairobi on the Map Kibera project. Kibera is a large slum that's 2.5 square kilometers in size. 250,000 people live there. It's in Nairobi, Kenya, and it's a famous slum. Nairobi is the headquarters of UN Habitat, which is responsible for informal settlements. It's very picturesque, so Kibera is a movie star. And despite all of this attention, if you went to any map of Kibera, it was a literal blank spot on the map. 250,000 people lived in a place which had no representation on any maps. So we went and worked with young people from Kibera, helped them learn how to use OpenStreetMap, like Millicent here, who's using a GPS unit to collect data on Kibera. We taught them how to map, how to tell stories, and now Map Kibera, which was going to be a 3-week project, has blossomed. It's a third year NGO in Nairobi and is spread to other slums there. The keystone of Map Kibera is OpenStreetMap. This is a project to create free and open map data throughout the world. It's completely volunteer. Anyone can contribute to OpenStreetMap. Anyone can use the data. It's a really amazing data source in a really amazing community. And it's also recently become very important for business. Companies like Foursquare and Apple are using OpenStreetMap not only because it's an amazing data source, but because they have the maximum freedom to use OpenStreetMap any way they wish, even if they want to make a map cake, which OpenStreetMap often does. Josh talked a bit about the 4636 response, and it's interesting. OpenStreetMap was also a big part of this response. And in fact, the OpenStreetMap response also started with a tweet on Twitter. I sent out a message asking, can OpenStreetMap respond and create a good data set for Haiti? And it actually ended up becoming the base map for the response for first responders for Haiti, Ushahidi project. We left Nairobi in 2010, end of 2010, and Map Kibera got a lot of interest. And really, since we left, we've been wondering, why are people so interested in this? I mean, it's interesting to me, but there's a lot of ideas out there about why Map Kibera is interesting. And really, what I've come up with is that technology is a great leveler. It creates a space where people from very, very different backgrounds can actually find a similar vocabulary and a similar set of ideas and work together. People in Kibera are from a very different social, economic, and political background, but yet they work on the same map and the same database with people who are mapping here in Korea. That ability for technology to be beautiful and inspiring makes our real-life differences still relevant, but somehow surmountable. And really, this marks a major change from centuries of practice when it comes to map making. Traditionally, maps are made by governments, by militaries, in order to bring legibility to the domain. In order for the state typically to carry out its activities, we hope for the best benefit of people. This was absolute, unquestioned information, and in the past few years, that's been completely upended. Anyone nowadays can create a map, anyone can tell their own stories, and I think we've only just begun to see what kind of political systems, what kind of relationships happen in economic development that result from that kind of technology. There's a lot of talk about open data, and I want to make a distinction between open data and open community data. Often when we talk about open data, we talk about government data, national and international data. And this is really at a high level. It's aggregated, it's filtered. And where, especially in economic development, things are happening on the ground. And just making that kind of data available, making national level data available in an open data site, which is a very popular thing to do these days, I think has the possibility of obscuring an actual lack of transparency. It can be riding a hype wave. So it's important, I think, that institutions are starting to recognize that community data is important, that this conference recognizes that it's important, and I think it will ultimately bring more clarity to economic development. For example, this is what an open mapping community could look like. This is the OpenStreetMap community in Kosovo. These guys are high school and college kids who love technology and they love their new country. When I first met them 2 years ago, they were throwing mapping parties, get-togethers, that were catered by their mothers. But today, they're in partnership with UNICEF. They work with them at the Kosovo Innovation Lab, experimenting with new flows of information in a place which has just barely become a state itself. Often these kind of techniques are called crowdsourcing, and it's a term that I personally think carries with it a lot of baggage. Crowds are wild, they're faceless, and I don't really think it describes accurately the kind of thing that we do in OpenStreetMap, the kind of thing that happens in Ushahidi instances. These are actually communities. We are complex, we have relationships both online and offline, and we really, really care about a common endeavor. I don't think that describes a crowd, and as a result, there's a lot of confusion about, I think, about the reliability and trustworthiness of data which is created in an open way. It actually can be much more trustworthy because more people are involved and more people really, really care about that data. Part of the reason why I think MapKibera is interesting has to do with low expectations. These are slum dwellers. They're barely educated, have very little experience. They're on the edge of poverty. And we are surprised that they can actually master the same technology that any of us can. And I think that's a problem. I mean, the question that occurs to me is, why are the poor poor? Is it their intrinsic fault that they're in their situation that they're in? I believe that there are huge global forces at play that are increasing urbanization, increasing slums. And UN Habitat estimates that by 2030, there will be 2 billion people in the world living in slums. That's just 20 years, less than 20 years from now, there'll be 2 billion people on the planet living in places like Kibera. So unless we raise our expectations and find ways to really substantially engage with people like this, I think we're all in for a lot of trouble. There's a lot of interest in data. Everyone loves data, they love maps. But I think the way we practice mapping, there's also a heavy storytelling component. Data alone can seem objective, but stories rarely are objective, they're subjective. And when you're talking about a community like Kibera, it takes a remarkable release of control to allow storytelling to happen in a place like this. People might say something that you don't want to hear, but something which really needs to be heard. So unless there's storytelling along with data creation, I think it can result in simple data extraction and a power inequality. There's a question about what is a community anyway. Communities are often very complex. They have internal divisions, and it takes time, it takes a trusted relationship to understand how to work and enter a community. But certainly, the one thing that a community is, it's people who live in that place. If you are a foreigner, if you are even an official or a local student coming into a new community, you have a different perspective than anyone who's living there. So that's a very important point when you're doing open community mapping. Make sure that it's actually people who are living in that place who are contributing data. There's a lot to learn from participatory development and other development practices in how you relate to people, Technology is very fast. We want to do things very quickly, and Map Kibera itself was a 3-week project, like I said originally. But really getting a substantial result takes a lot of time. It takes building a relationship, and that's why Map Kibera is still there as an organization. This is a kind of community which we've also started working in. East Jerusalem, similar to Kibera, is very well known. It's very politicized, but yet if you look at maps, the maps of East Jerusalem are very poor. And certainly people who are living in East Jerusalem do not have many opportunities to tell their own stories. There's an organization called Grassroots Jerusalem, which is working with local groups and individuals to help them get their data onto OpenStreetMap and tell their own stories. For instance, this is Awalaje, this village there. It's on the outskirts of Jerusalem and near to Bethlehem, and it is being completely surrounded by the security barrier. So in order to enter and exit the village, you have to go through a military checkpoint. Are we prepared to talk about these kind of places where everyday life is so politicized? We're all learning how this is actually going to work. In January, the World Bank, which has been a very generous proponent of open data and open community data, announced an MOU with Google MapMaker, which is a proprietary closed data source. And there was a lot of confusion that came about, like why isn't this a good thing? Turns out there's a difference between a proprietary data source and an open data source that anyone has access to. And the differences can be locked up in a lot of legal detail. You basically, over the past few years, I feel like I've become a lawyer of data licenses, and it's complicated stuff. But through this event, this episode, we all learned together a bit more about this space. And in the end, the World Bank came around and announced that they would only support community mapping projects where the people who created data have access to that data themselves. So I think it's important to declare some principles around open community data. It does need to be open data, and it needs to be in an open technical community. People from that community should be doing it themselves, and they should use whatever tools are most appropriate for them. And importantly, those activities should be connected to their immediate needs and immediately available in forms which are usable for them. Here's one example. This is Port-au-Prince. Humanitarian OpenStreetMap team has been working in Haiti since the earthquake, and we continue to support the Haitian OpenStreetMap community. There is an informal bus system in Port-au-Prince called Tap-Taps. There's no formal city-approved buses, but people run bus routes, and the city depends on it in order to go about its everyday life. Using the same data that was collected during the earthquake, because it's in the commons, this is a bus route map of all the Tap-Taps. So now this system is more transparent and maybe has potential to become more formalized or be improved. We have to take heed as these open source communities start to meet institutions. Open source communities have a lot in common with these marginalized communities like Kibera. When they enter the spotlight, when they receive funding, they can be distorted by that great gravity. We need to really find a space where open source communities and hierarchies and institutions can come together and talk about how to best shape this practice so that ultimately it's of the best benefit to humanity. Just to kind of contextualize a little bit to Korea, I'm sure I don't need to tell most of you that 60 years ago, Korea was the poorest or among the poorest nations on Earth. And in the past 60 years, it's grown to be one of the strongest economies on the Earth. 60 years ago, Kenya had a higher GDP per capita than Korea. And this is what's happened in the past 60 years. So now Korea is being upheld as a model for economic development, even in African nations. And I think that's great. I really want to learn more about what's happened here. But I think it's important to look at the kind of challenges that African nations have faced. Particularly, there's been internal divisions, especially along manipulated ethnic lines, and corruption, both of these problems inherited from the colonial governments. So there is sometimes a call to do economic development with no strings attached, just to make money. I fear that has a potential not to solve these problems. But perhaps if in combination with new tools for openness and transparency, economic development in Africa can learn from Korea. Really, what I think open community mapping is about is it's a fundamental power shift. People are learning the facts about their own lives, and with those facts, they can call institutions to account which are supposed to be serving them. And ultimately, I think they will have the tools and the ability to improve their lives themselves. So thank you, and I look forward to the next couple days to build on this talk into conversation with all of you. Thanks.